Tree Grows in Brooklyn, Chapter 33. Yes, there was a great deal of curiosity about sex among the adolescent children of Williamsburg. There was a lot of talk about it. Among the younger children, there was some exhibitionism. You show me, I'll show you. A few hypocrites devised such evasive games as playing house or doctor. A few uninhibited ones did what they called play dirty. There was a great hush-hush about sex in that neighborhood. When the children asked questions, the parents didn't know how to answer them, for the reason that these people did not know the correct words to use. Each married couple had its own secret words for things which were whispered in bed in the quiet of night. But there were a few mothers brave enough to bring these words out into the daylight and present them to a child. When the children grew up, they in turn invented words which they couldn't tell their children. Katie Nolan was neither a mental nor a physical coward. She tackled each problem masterfully. She didn't volunteer sex information, but when Francie asked questions, she answered as best she knew how. Once, when Francie and Neely were young children, they had agreed to ask their mother certain questions. They stood before her one day. Francie was the spokesman. "Mama, where did we come from?" "God gave you to me." The Catholic children were willing to accept that, but the next question was a sticker. "How did God get us to you?" "I can't explain that because I'd have to use a lot of big words that you wouldn't understand." "Say the big words and see if we understand them." "If you understood them, I wouldn't have to tell you." "Say it in some kind of words. Tell us how babies get here." "No, you're too little yet. And if I told you, you'd go around telling all the other children what you know, and their mothers would come up here and say I was a dirty lady and there would be fights." "Well, tell us why girls are different from boys." Mama thought a while. "The main difference is that a girl sits down when she goes to the bathroom and a little boy stands up." "But Mama," Francie said, "I stand up when I'm afraid in that dark toilet." "And I," confessed Neely, "sit down when—" Mama interrupted. "Well, there's a little bit of man in every woman and a little bit of woman in every man." That ended the discussion because it was so puzzling to the children that they decided to go no further with it. When Francie, as she wrote in her diary, started to change into a woman, she went to Mama about her sex curiosity. Katie told her simply and plainly all that she herself knew. There were times in the telling when Katie had to use words which were considered dirty, but she used them bravely and unflinchingly because she knew no other words. No one had ever told her about the things she told her daughter. And in those days, there were no books available for people like Katie from which she could learn about sex in the right way. In spite of the blunt words and homely phrasing, there was nothing revolting in Katie's explanations. Francie was luckier than most children of the neighborhood. She found out what she needed to know at the time she needed to know about it. She never needed to slink into dark hallways with other girls and exchange guilty confidences. She never had to learn things in a distorted way. If normal sex was a mystery in the neighborhood, criminal sex was an open book. In all poor and congested city areas, the prowling sex fiend is a nightmarish horror that haunts parents. There seems to be one in every neighborhood. There was one in Williamsburg that year when Francie turned 14. For a long time, he had been molesting little girls, and although the police were on continual lookout for him, he was never caught. One of the reasons was that when a little girl was attacked, the parents kept it secret so that no one would know and discriminate against the child and look on her as a thing apart and make it impossible for her to resume a normal childhood with her playmates. One day, a little girl on Francie's block was killed, and it had to come out in the open. She had been a quiet little thing of 7, well-behaved and obedient. When she didn't come home from school, her mother didn't worry. She thought the child had stopped somewhere to play. After supper, they went looking for her. They questioned her playmates. No one had seen the child since school let out. A fear wave swept over the neighborhood. Children were called in off the streets and kept behind locked doors. McShane came over with half a dozen policemen and they began combing the roofs and cellars. The child was found at last by her loutish 17-year-old brother. Her little body was lying across a busted-down doll carriage in a cellar of a nearby house. Her torn dress and undergarments, her shoes, and little red socks were thrown on an ash heap. The brother was questioned. He was excited and stuttered when he answered. They arrested him on suspicion. McShane wasn't stupid. The arrest was a blind to put the killer off guard. McShane knew that the killer would feel safe and strike again, and this time the police would be waiting for him. Parents went into action. The children were told, and to hell with the finding the right words, about the fiend and the horrible things he did. Little girls were warned not to take candy from strangers, not to speak to strange men. Mothers took to waiting in the doorways for their children when school let out. The streets were deserted. It was as if the Pied Piper had led all the children off to some mountain fastness. The whole neighborhood was terrorized. Johnny got so worried about Francie, he got a gun. Johnny had a friend named Bert, who was a night watchman at the corner bank. Bert was 40 years old and married to a girl half his age of whom he was insanely jealous. He suspected that she took a lover in the nights when he was at the bank. He brooded over this so much that he came to the conclusion that it would be a relief if he knew for sure that this was so. He was willing to exchange soul-destroying suspicion for heartbreaking reality. Accordingly, he slipped home at odd hours during the night, while his friend Johnny Nolan watched the bank for him. They had signals. When in the night, poor Bert got so tormented that he had to go home, he asked the cop on the beat to go ring the Nolan bell 3 times. If Johnny was home, when the signal came, he jumped out of bed like a fireman, dressed hurriedly, and ran to the bank as though his life depended on it. After the watchman slipped out, Johnny lay on Bert's narrow cot and felt the hard revolver through the thin pillow. He hoped someone would attempt to rob the bank so he could save the money and be a hero. But all the hours of his night watching were without event. There wasn't even the excitement of the watchman catching his wife in adultery. The girl was always sleeping soundly and alone when her husband sneaked into their flat. When Johnny heard of the rape and murder, he went over to the bank to see his friend Bert. He asked the watchman whether he had another gun. "Sure, why?" "I'd like the lend of it, Bert." "Why, Johnny?" "There's this fellow loose that killed the little girl on our block." "I hope they catch him, Johnny. I sure hope they catch the son of a bitch." "I have a daughter of my own." Yeah, I know, Johnny. So I'd like you to loan me a gun." "It's against the Sullivan law." "It's against some other law for you to go away from the bank and leave me here. How do you know I may be a robber?" "Ah, no, Johnny." "I figure if we break one law, we might as well break another." All right, I'll lend it." He opened a desk drawer and took out a revolver. "Now I'll show you. When you want to kill somebody, you point it at them like this." He pointed it at Johnny. "And you pull this thing." "I see. Let me try it." In his turn, Johnny aimed it at Bert. "Course," said Bert, "I ain't never shot off the goddamn thing myself." "It's the first time I ever held a gun in my hand," said Johnny. "Watch out then," said the watchman quietly. "It's loaded." Johnny shivered and put the gun down carefully. "Say, Bert, I didn't know. We might have killed each other." "Jesus, you're right," the watchman shuddered. "One jerk of a finger and a man is dead," mused Johnny. "Johnny, you ain't thinking of killing yourself." "No, I'm letting the booze do that." Johnny started to laugh, but stopped abruptly. As he left with the gun, Bert said, "Let me know if you catch the bastard." "I'll do that," promised Johnny. "Yeah, so long. So long, Bert." Johnny gathered his family around him and explained about the gun. He warned Francie and Neely not to touch it. "This little cylinder holds death for 5 people in it," he explained dramatically. Francie thought the revolver looked like a grotesque beckoning finger, a finger that beckoned to death and made it come running. She was glad when Papa put it out of sight under his pillow. The gun lay under Johnny's pillow for a month and was never touched. There were no further outrages in the neighborhood. It seemed that the fiend had moved on. Mothers began to relax. A few, however, like Katie, continued to watch in the door or hallway when they knew the children were due home from school. It was the killer's habit to lurk in dark hallways for his victims. Katie felt that it cost nothing to be careful. When most of the people were lulled into a feeling of security, the pervert struck again. One afternoon, Katie was cleaning in the halls of the second house away from her own. She heard the children in the street and knew that school was out. She wondered whether it was necessary to go back and wait in her hallway for Francie, as she had been doing since the murder. Francie was nearly 14 and old enough to take care of herself. Besides, the killer usually attacked little girls of 6 or 7. Maybe he had been caught in some other neighborhood and was safe in jail. Still, she hesitated, then decided to go home. She'd be needing a fresh bar of soap within the hour and could kill 2 birds with 1 stone if she got it now. She looked up and down the street and grew uneasy when she didn't see Francie among the children. Then she remembered that Francie went further to school and came home a bit later. Once in the flat, Katie decided to heat the coffee and have a cupful. By that time, Francie should be home and her mind would be at peace. She went into the bedroom to see if the gun was still under the pillow. Of course it was, and she felt foolish for looking. She drank the coffee, took her bar of yellow soap, and started back for work. Francie got home at her usual time. She opened the hall door, stared up and down the long, narrow hall, saw nothing, and closed the solid wood door behind her. Now the hall was darkened. She walked the short length of the hall towards the stairs. As she put her foot on the first step, she saw him. He stepped out from a small recess under the stairs that had an entrance to the cellar. He walked softly but with lunging steps. He was thin and undersized and wore a shabby dark suit with a collarless and tieless shirt. His thick bushy hair grew down on his forehead almost to his eyebrows. He had a beaked nose and his mouth was a thin crooked line. Even in the semi-darkness, Francie was aware of his wet-looking eyes. She took another step then. As she got a better look at him, her legs turned to cement. She couldn't lift them to take the next step. Her hands clutched the 2 banister spokes and she clung to them. What hypnotized her into being unable to move was the fact that the man was coming toward her with his lower garments open. Francie stared at the exposed part of his body in paralyzed horror. It was wormy white, contrasted with the ugly dark sallowness of his face and hands. She felt the same kind of nausea she had once felt when she saw a swarm of fat white maggots crawling over the putrid carcass of a rat. She tried to scream "Mama," but her throat closed over and only air came out. It was like a horrible dream where you tried to scream but no sound came. She couldn't move. She couldn't move. Her hands hurt from gripping the banister spokes. Irreverently, she wondered why they didn't snap off in her tight grasp. And now he was coming towards her and she couldn't run. She couldn't run. Please God, she prayed, let some tenant come along. At this moment, Katie was walking down the stairs quietly with the bar of yellow soap in her hand. When she came to the top of the last flight, she looked down and saw the man coming at Francie, and saw that Francie was frozen to the banister spokes. Katie made no sound. Neither one saw her. She turned quietly and ran up the 2 flights to her flat. Her hand was steady as she took the key from under the mat and opened the door. She took precious time, not aware of what she was doing, to set the cake of yellow soap on the washtub cover. She got the gun from under the pillow, aimed it, and keeping it aimed, put it under her apron. Now her hand was trembling. She put her other hand under the apron and steadied the gun with her 2 hands. Holding the gun in this way, she ran down the stairs. The murderer reached the foot of the stairs, rounded it, and leapt up the 2 steps, and quick as a cat threw one arm around Francie's neck and pressed his palm to her mouth to prevent her screaming. He put his other arm around her waist and started to pull her away. He slipped, and the exposed part of his body touched her bare leg. The leg jerked as though a live flame had been put to it. Her legs came out of the paralysis then, and she kicked and struggled. At that, the pervert pressed his body close to hers, pinning her against the banister. He began undoing her clenched fingers one by one. He got one hand free, forced it behind her back, and leaned hard against it while he started to work on her other hand. There was a sound. Francie looked up and saw her mother running down the last flight of stairs. Katie was running awkwardly, not balancing well on account of having both hands clutched under her apron. The man saw her. He couldn't see that she had a gun. Reluctantly, he loosened his hold and backed down the 2 steps, keeping his wet eyes on Katie. Francie stood there, one hand still gripping the banister spoke. She couldn't get her hand open. The man got off the steps, pressed his back to the wall, and started sliding against it to the cellar door. Katie stopped, knelt on a step, pushed her apron bulge between 2 banister spokes, stared at the exposed part of his body, and pulled the trigger. There was a loud explosion and the smell of burnt cloth as the hole in Katie's apron smoldered. The pervert's lip curled back to show broken, dirty teeth. He put both hands on his stomach and fell. His hands came away as he hit the floor, and blood was all over that part of him that had been worm white. The narrow hall was full of smoke. Women screamed, doors banged open. There was the sound of running feet in the halls. People in the streets started pouring into the hall. In a second, the doorway was jammed and no one could get in or out. Katie grabbed Francie's hand and tried to pull her up the stairs, but the child's hand was frozen to the spoke. She couldn't open her fingers. In desperation, Katie hit Francie's wrist with the gun butt, and the numb fingers relaxed at last. Katie pulled her up the steps and through the halls. She kept meeting women coming out of their flats. "What's the matter? What's the matter?" they screamed. "It's all right now. It's all right now," Katie told them. Francie kept stumbling and going to her knees. Katie had to drag her on her knees the length of the last hall. She got her into the flat and onto the couch in the kitchen. Then she put the chain bolt on the door. As she put the gun down carefully next to the bar of yellow soap, her hand accidentally touched the muzzle. She was frightened when she found it warm. Katie knew nothing about guns. She had never shot one before. Now she thought that the heat might make the gun go off by itself. She opened the washtub cover and threw the gun into the water, in which some soiled clothes were soaking. Because the bar of yellow soap was mixed up in the whole thing, she threw that in after the gun. She went to Francie. "Did he hurt you, Francie?" "No, Mama," she moaned. "Only it touched my leg." "Where?" Francie pointed to a spot above her blue sock. The skin was white and unharmed. Francie looked at it in surprise. She had an idea that the skin would have been eaten away there. "There's nothing the matter with it," Mama said. "But I can still feel where it touched," she moaned, and cried out insanely, "I want my leg cut off." People pounded on the door, demanding to know what had happened. Katie ignored them and kept the door bolted. She made Francie swallow a cup of scalding hot black coffee. Then she walked up and down the room. She was trembling now. She didn't know what to do next. Neely had been loitering on the street when the shot sounded. When he saw the people crowding into the hallway, he too worked his way in. He got up on the stairs and looked over the banisters. The pervert was huddled where he had fallen. The crowd of women had torn the trousers from his body, and all who could get near were grinding their heels into his flesh. Others were kicking at him and spitting on him. All were shrieking obscenities at him. Neely heard his sister's name. "Francie Nolan?" "Yeah, Francie Nolan." "You sure? Francie Nolan?" "I tell you, I seen." Her mother went and... "Francie Nolan?" He heard the ambulance gong. He thought Francie had been killed. He raced up the stairs sobbing. He pounded on the door screaming, "Let me in, Mama, let me in." Katie let him in. When he saw Francie lying on the couch, he bawled louder. Now Francie started to bawl. "Stop it, stop it," Katie screamed. She shook Neely until he didn't have a sob left in him. "Run and get your father. Look all over until you find him." Neely found Papa in McGarrity's saloon. Johnny was just about to settle down to a long afternoon of slow drinking. When he heard Neely's story, he dropped his glass and ran out with them. They couldn't get back into the house. The ambulance was at the door, and 4 policemen were fighting a way through the crowd to get the ambulance doctor in. Johnny and Neely went through the next door cellar into the yard, helped each other over the board fence into their own yard, and climbed up the fire escape. When Katie saw Johnny's derby looming outside the window, she screamed and ran around frantically looking for the gun. Fortunately for Johnny, she'd forgotten where she'd thrown it. Johnny ran to Francie, and big as she was, he picked her up in his arms as though she were a baby. He rocked her and told her to go to sleep. Francie kept insisting she wanted her leg cut off. "Did he get her?" said Johnny. "No, but I got him," Katie said grimly. "Did you shoot him with the pistol?" "With what else?" She showed him the hole in her apron. "Did you shoot him good?" "As good as I could, but she keeps talking about her leg. Her eyes slid towards Neely. "Well, you know, touched her leg." She pointed to the spot. Johnny looked but saw nothing. "That's too bad it had to happen to her," Katie said. "She's such a one for remembering. She might never get married remembering." "We'll fix that leg," promised Papa. He put Francie back on the couch, got the carbolic acid, and swabbed the spot with the strong raw stuff. Francie welcomed the burning pain of the acid. She felt that the evil of the man's touch was being seared away. Someone pounded at the door. They remained quiet and unanswering. They wanted no outsiders in their home at this time. A strong Irish voice called, "Open the door! 'Tis the law now." Katie opened the door. A policeman walked in, followed by an ambulance intern carrying a bag. The cop pointed to Francie. "This the kid he tried to get?" "Yes." "Doc here has to make an examination." "I won't allow it," protested Katie. "It's the law," he answered quietly. So Katie and the intern took Francie into the bedroom, and the terrified child had to submit to the indignity of an examination. The jaunty intern made a quick and careful examination. He straightened up and started to put his instruments back into the bag. He said, "She's okay. He never got near her. He took her swollen wrist in his hand. How did this happen?" "I had to hit her with the gun to make her let go of the banister," Katie explained. He noticed her bruised knee. "What's this?" "That's where I had to drag her along the hall." Then he got to the angry burn just above her ankle. "And what in the name of God is this?" "That's where her father washed her leg with carbolic acid where the man touched her." "My God!" exploded the intern. "You trying to give her third-degree burns?" He opened the bag again, put a cooling salve on the burn, and bandaged it neatly. "My God," he said again. "Between the two of you, you did more damage than the criminal." He smoothed down Francie's dress, patted her cheek, and said, "You'll be all right, girlie. I'm going to give you something to put you to sleep. When you wake up, just remember that you had a bad dream. That's all it was, a bad dream. Hear?" "Yes, sir," Francie said gratefully. Again she saw a poised needle. She remembered something from a long time ago. She worried. Was her arm clean? Would he say, "That's a brave girl," he said as the needle jabbed. "Why, he's on my side," thought Francie hazily. She went to sleep immediately after the hypodermic. Katie and the doctor came into the kitchen. Johnny and the cop were sitting at the table. The cop had a bit of pencil clutched in his big paw, and he was painfully making small notes into a small notebook. "Kid all right?" asked the cop. "Fine," the intern told him. "Just suffering from shock and peritonitis." He winked at the cop. "When she wakes up," he said to Katie, "just remember to keep telling her that she had a bad dream. Don't talk about it otherwise." "What do I owe you, Doc?" asked Johnny. "Nothing, Mac. This one's on the city." "Thank you," whispered Johnny. The intern noticed Johnny's trembling hands. He pulled a pint flask from his hip pocket and thrust it at Johnny. "Here." Johnny looked up at him. "Go ahead, Mac," insisted the intern. Gratefully, Johnny took a long swallow. The intern passed the flask to Katie. "You too, lady. You look as if you need it." Katie took a big drink. The cop spoke up. "What do you take me for, an orphan?" When the intern got the flask back from the cop, there was only an inch left in it. He sighed and emptied the bottle. The cop sighed too and turned to Johnny. "Now where do you keep the gun?" "Under my pillow." "Get it. I got to take it over to the station house." Katie, forgetting how she had disposed of the gun, went into the bedroom to look under the pillow, and she came back looking worried. "Why, it's not there." The cop laughed. "Naturally. You took it out to shoot the louse." It took Katie a long time to remember that she had thrown it in the wash tub. She fished it out. The cop wiped it off and took out the bullets. He asked Johnny a question. "You got a permit for this, Mac?" "No." "That's tough." "It's not my gun." "Who gave it to you?" "No, nobody." Johnny didn't want to get the watchman in trouble. "How did you get it then?" "I found it. Yes, I found it in the gutter." "All oiled and loaded." "Honest." "And that's your story?" "That's my story." "It's okay by me, Mac. See that you stick to it." The ambulance driver hollered from the hall that he was back from taking the man to the hospital, and was the doc ready to leave. "Hospital?" Katie asked. "Then I didn't kill him?" "I got a statement from him before he passed out," said the cop. "That little kid down the block, he killed her. He was responsible for the other 2 jobs, too. I got his statement signed and witnessed." He patted his pocket. "I wouldn't be surprised if I got a promotion out of this when the commissioner hears." "I hope so," said Katie bleakly. "I hope somebody gets some good out of it." When Francie woke the next morning, Papa was there to tell her that it was all a dream. and as time passed, it did seem like a dream to Francie. It left no ugliness in her memories. Her physical terror had blunted her emotional perceptions. The terror on the stairs had been brief, a bare 3 minutes in time, and terror had served as an anesthetic. The events following were hazy in her mind on account of the unaccustomed hypodermic. Even the hearing in court where she had to tell her story seemed like a part in an unreal play in which her lines were brief. There was a hearing, but Katie was told beforehand that it was a technicality. Francie remembered little of it, except that she told her story and Katie told hers. Few words were needed. "I was coming home from school," testified Francie, "and when I got in the hall, this man came out and grabbed me before I could scream. While he was trying to drag me off the stairs, my mother came down." Katie said, "I came down the stairs and saw him there pulling my daughter. I ran up and got the gun. It didn't take long, and I ran down and shot him while he was trying to sneak down the cellar." Francie wondered whether Mama would be arrested for shooting a man. But no, it ended up with the judge shaking Mama's hand, and hers too. A lucky thing happened about the newspapers. A soused reporter, going through his nightly routine of calling up the station houses for police blotter news, got the facts of the story, but confused the Nolan name with the name of the policeman on the case. There was a half a column in a Brooklyn paper which said that Mrs. O'Leary of Williamsburg had shot a prowler in the hallway of her home. The next day, 2 of the New York newspapers gave it 2 inches in which they stated that Mrs. O'Leary of Williamsburg had been shot by a prowler in the hallway of her home. Eventually, the whole affair faded away into the background. Katie was a neighborhood heroine for a while, but as time passed, the neighborhood forgot about the murdering pervert. They remembered only that Katie Nolan had shot a man. And in speaking of her, they said that she's not one to get into a fight with. Why, she'd shoot a person just as soon as look at them. The scar from the carbolic acid never left Francie's leg, but dwindled down to the size of a dime. Francie got used to it in time, and as she grew older, she seldom noticed it anymore. As for Johnny, they fined him $5 for violating the Sullivan Law, having a gun without a permit. And oh yes, the watchman's young wife eventually ran away with an Italian a little nearer her own age. Some days later, Sergeant McShane came over looking for Katie. He saw her lugging a can of ashes out to the curb, and his heart turned over with pity. He gave her a hand with the ash can. Katie thanked him and looked up at him. She had seen him once since the Mattie Mahoney outing, the day he had asked Francie was she her mother. The other time was when he brought Johnny home, the time when Johnny couldn't get himself home. Katie had heard that Mrs. McShane was now in a sanatorium for incurable tuberculosis patients. She was not expected to live long. Would he marry again afterwards? Katie wondered. Of course he will. She answered her own question. He's a fine-looking, upstanding man with a good job, and some woman will snap him up. He took off his hat while he spoke to her. "Mrs. Nolan, the boys down at the station house and myself do be thanking you for helping us out in the catching of the murderer." "You're welcome," said Katie conventionally. "And to show their appreciation, what did the boys do but pass the hat for you?" He extended an envelope. "Money?" she asked. "It is that. Keep it." "Sure, you'll be needing it with your man not working steady and the children being needing this and that." "That's none of your business, Sergeant McShane. You can see that I work hard and we don't need anything from anybody." "Just as you say." He put the envelope back into his pocket, looking at her steadily all the while. Here's a woman, he thought, with a trim figure on her and a pretty white-faced skin and black curling hair. And she's got courage and pride enough for 6 like her. I'm a middle-aged man of 45, his thoughts went on, and she's but a slip of a girl. Katie was 31, but looked much younger. We've both had hard luck when it came to marrying, that we did. McShane knew all about Johnny and knew that he wouldn't last long the way he was going on. He had nothing but pity for Johnny. He had nothing but pity for Molly, his wife. He wouldn't have harmed either of them. He had never once considered being physically unfaithful to his sickly wife. But is hoping in my heart harming either one of them, he asked himself. Of course there'll be the waiting. How many years? 2, 5? Ah, well, I've waited long enough time without hope of happiness. Sure, and I can wait a bit longer now. He thanked her again and said goodbye formally. As he held her hand in the hand clasp, he thought, "She'll be my wife some day, God and she be willin'." Katie could not know what he was thinking, or could she? Maybe, because something prompted her to call after him. "I hope that some day you'll be as happy as you deserve to be, Sergeant McShane."